didn't shout. He didn't resist. He just packed his things, slow, calm, silent, and walked out into the freezing rain. The shelter called him a troublemaker, a thief. Just another homeless vet taking up space. No one asked about the name stitched on his jacket. Rodriguez. No one recognized the stare of a man who'd survived 47 missions behind enemy lines. But 2 hours later, the storm wasn't the only thing sweeping through the city. A black SUV pulled up, and 4 men stepped out. Delta Force doesn't forget its own. And tonight, silence had a response. If you believe real warriors never walk alone, hit like, comment brotherhood, and subscribe, because some uniforms are invisible, but never forgotten. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of Hope Haven shelter like bullets against armor plating. Inside, 43 souls huddled on thin mattresses, their belongings stuffed into plastic bags and worn duffel bags. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across faces that had seen too much street time and not enough hope. In the far corner, away from the main crowd, sat Marcus "Ghost" Rodriguez, 52 years old, silver threading through his black hair, and eyes that still swept corners out of habit. His army jacket hung loose on his frame, the same desert camo he'd worn in Afghanistan, now faded and torn at the shoulders. The name tape still read Rodriguez in block letters, though the edges were fraying. Marcus didn't talk much. Hadn't since he'd arrived at the shelter 3 weeks ago. He kept his head down, followed the rules, and tried to stay invisible, just like he'd been trained to do behind enemy lines. But tonight, staying invisible wouldn't be enough. The shelter supervisor, Dale Morrison, was having a bad day. His wife had left him, his car needed repairs, and the city was threatening to cut funding again. He needed someone to blame, someone to take control over, and the quiet veteran in the corner seemed like the perfect target. "Hey, Rodriguez," Dale's voice cut through the low murmur of conversations. "You been hoarding food again?" Marcus looked up slowly, his hands steady on his knees. "No, sir, just what was given to me." "Don't lie to me, soldier boy. I saw you take extra rolls at dinner." Dale's voice rose, drawing attention from other residents. "You think being military makes you special? Think you deserve more than everyone else?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had learned long ago that defending himself often made things worse. He simply shook his head and looked down at his worn boots. What Dale Morrison didn't know was that Marcus Rodriguez wasn't just any veteran. He was a former Delta Force operator, a man who had spent 15 years conducting missions that didn't officially exist. He'd been inserted into hostile territory 47 times, had saved American lives from situations that would break most men, and had earned a chest full of medals that he'd never worn in public. The nightmares had started after his 3rd deployment. Then came the drinking. Then the pills. Then the slow, grinding collapse of everything he'd built outside the military. His marriage, his civilian job, his house, his savings, all gone, one piece at a time, until the only thing left was the jacket on his back and the memories that wouldn't let him sleep. Marcus had been living on the streets for 8 months when he'd found Hope Haven. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and they didn't ask too many questions. He'd been model resident, helping in the kitchen, keeping to himself, never causing trouble. But Dale had been watching him, looking for a reason. "Stand up when I'm talking to you," Dale barked, stepping closer. His breath smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes. "You military types think you're better than the rest of us, but look at you now. Nothing, nobody, just another bum with a sob story." Marcus rose slowly, his movements controlled despite the rage building in his chest. Around them, other residents shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others watched with the morbid fascination of people who'd seen too many confrontations turn ugly. "I'm not looking for trouble, sir," Marcus said quietly. "Just trying to get through the night." "Well, you're troubled just by being here," Dale shot back. "You know what I think? I think you're using, and I think you're stealing. That's what I think." The search of Marcus's belongings was thorough and humiliating. Dale tore through his duffel bag like a man possessed, scattering worn clothes and personal items across the floor. He found nothing. No drugs, no stolen food, no contraband of any kind. Just the meager possessions of a man who'd lost everything. But Dale was past caring about facts. He'd committed to the confrontation, and backing down now would look like weakness. He needed to win, needed to assert his authority, needed to prove that he was still in control of something in his life. "You know what?" Dale said, his voice carrying across the shelter. "I don't like your attitude. I don't like how you look at me. And I especially don't like having ungrateful military has-beens in my shelter." He kicked at Marcus's scattered belongings. "Pack your stuff. You're out." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the rain seemed to quiet for a moment. Marcus knelt slowly and began gathering his things, his hand steady despite the humiliation. He'd been thrown out of better places by better men. "You can't just kick him out," said a thin woman named Sarah from across the room. "It's pouring outside. It's freezing." "I can do whatever I want," Dale snapped. "This is my shelter, my rules, and my rule is that troublemakers don't get to stay." Marcus finished packing in silence. He slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and walked toward the door, his head up, his stride measured. He'd learned long ago that dignity was something you carried inside, not something others could take away. As he reached the exit, Dale called out one last insult. "Don't come crawling back when you realize nobody else wants you either, soldier boy. The world's moved on. Nobody cares about your service anymore." Marcus paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For just a moment, the other residents saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, but something colder, more dangerous. Then it was gone, and he stepped out into the storm. The rain cut through Marcus's jacket like ice water, soaking his clothes within minutes. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, and the wind was picking up, turning the precipitation into sharp, stinging needles. He pulled his hood up and started walking, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the orange glow of streetlights. Downtown was empty at this hour. The businesses were closed, their windows dark and unwelcoming. The few people on the streets hurried past with their heads down, unwilling to make eye contact with the homeless man walking through the storm. Marcus found a doorway that offered some protection from the wind and settled in for the night. He'd slept in worse places, in caves in the Hindu Kush, in bombed-out buildings in Fallujah, in the back of pickup trucks racing through hostile territory. But this was different. This was home, and home wasn't supposed to feel like a war zone. He pulled out his phone, an old flip phone with a cracked screen that barely held a charge. There was one contact in it, marked only as Apex. He'd never used it, had sworn he never would. It was for emergencies only, and Marcus had always been too proud to consider his personal problems emergencies. But as he sat shivering in the doorway, watching the rain turn to sleet, he began to reconsider. His fingers hovered over the keypad, muscle memory wanting to dial the number he'd memorized years ago. The number that would connect him to his old unit, to the men who'd become his brothers in the darkest places on earth. He closed the phone and put it away. Not yet. He could handle this. He'd handled worse. What Marcus didn't know was that he wasn't as alone as he thought. 3 blocks away, in a small apartment above a used bookstore, a man named Tommy Chen was lying awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the storm. Tommy was 28, compact and fit, with the kind of watchful eyes that marked him as a former military. Tommy had been Marcus's spotter during their last 3 deployments. They'd shared foxholes and MREs, had watched each other's backs in situations where a moment's inattention meant death. When Marcus had started struggling with civilian life, Tommy had tried to help, but Marcus had been too proud to accept it. So Tommy had found other ways to help. He'd gotten a job at the bookstore, rented the apartment upstairs, and quietly kept watch over his former team leader. He knew about the shelter, knew about the drinking, knew about the nightmares, and he knew that Marcus would rather die than ask for help. The text came at 11:47 p.m. from Sarah, the thin woman at the shelter. Tommy had given her his number weeks ago, along with a $20 bill and simple instructions. If anything happened to Marcus, she was to message him immediately. They threw him out. Dale kicked him out in the storm. He's out there somewhere. Tommy was out of bed and dressed in 30 seconds. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, and a secure phone from a locked drawer. The phone had only one number programmed into it, labeled Command. He'd never used it either, but tonight felt different. As he ran through the rain toward his car, Tommy made the call, It rang twice before a voice answered, clear and professional, despite the late hour. Command. This is Chen. I need immediate assistance. Priority Alpha. There was a pause. Priority Alpha meant one of their own was in danger. It meant all resources, all protocols, all rules went out the window. Location? Downtown. Homeless veteran, former Delta, kicked out of shelter in freezing rain. Request immediate extraction and support. Copy that. Stand by. In a nondescript office building in Virginia, Colonel James Mitchell was reviewing after-action reports when his secure phone buzzed. He'd been expecting the call for months, ever since he'd learned that Marcus Rodriguez was living on the streets. Mitchell had served with Marcus for 12 years, had seen him perform miracles in impossible situations, and had watched helplessly as the warrior crumbled under the weight of memories. Talk to me, Chen, Mitchell said, his voice steady but concerned. Sir, Ghost is out in the cold. Civilian threw him out of a shelter, temperature's dropping, and he's got nowhere to go. He's too proud to call for help, but he's going to freeze if we don't act. Mitchell was already reaching for his other phone, the one connected to the Delta Force operational network. How long since he was ejected? About 2 hours, sir. Could be hypothermic by now. Negative. Ghost's too tough for that, but we're not taking chances. Mitchell's fingers flew over his keyboard, pulling up maps, weather reports, and personnel rosters. I'm activating Shepard protocol, full extraction, full support, and I want the civilian who did this to understand exactly what he's done. Shepard protocol was unofficial, unwritten, and absolutely sacred. It meant that when one of their own was in danger, everything else stopped. Resources would be redirected, favors would be called in, and the full weight of the most elite military unit in the world would be brought to bear on the problem. Within 10 minutes, Mitchell had assembled a team. 4 active-duty Delta operators, 2 support personnel, and a logistics coordinator. They would be on the ground in 3 hours, with full authority to do whatever was necessary to bring Marcus Rodriguez home. Chen, Mitchell said into his phone, I need you to find Ghost and keep eyes on him. Don't approach, don't interfere, just watch. Help is coming. Tommy Chen moved through the downtown streets like a ghost, his footsteps silent on the wet pavement. He'd changed into dark clothes and a waterproof jacket, his movements economical and purposeful. This was what he'd been trained for: urban reconnaissance, target acquisition, stealth operations. He found Marcus in the 4th doorway he checked, huddled against the cold with his knees pulled up to his chest. Even in the dim light, Tommy could see that his former team leader was in bad shape. His lips were blue, his hands were shaking, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. Tommy settled into a concealed position across the street, behind a parked car that gave him a clear view of the doorway. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Mitchell. Target located. Condition poor but stable. Maintaining overwatch. The response came immediately. ETA 90 minutes. Do not engage unless emergency. Tommy understood. This wasn't about rescuing Marcus from the cold. He was tough enough to survive a few more hours. This was about something bigger. This was about sending a message, about showing what happened when someone disrespected a soldier who'd bled for his country. As Tommy watched, Marcus stirred and reached for his phone. For a moment, it looked like he might make the call he'd been avoiding. But then he put the phone away and settled back against the door, his jaw set with the stubborn determination that had made him legendary in the special operations community. Still too proud to ask for help, Tommy muttered to himself. Don't worry, Ghost. Help's coming whether you want it or not. At 2:15 a.m., a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb across from Hope Haven Shelter. The vehicle was unremarkable except for the government plates and the way it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The engine idled quietly, producing almost no sound. 4 men stepped out, their movements coordinated and precise. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, boots, and dark jackets, but their bearing marked them as military. Their leader was a tall man with graying hair and eyes like chips of granite. Master Sergeant Williams had served with Marcus Rodriguez for 8 years and had personally recommended him for the Medal of Honor after a particularly brutal mission in Syria. Chen, this is Shepard 1. We're in position, Williams spoke into his radio. Copy, Shepard 1. Ghost is still in position, approximately 4 blocks northeast of your location. Understood. Shepard 2 and 3, secure the perimeter. Shepard 4, you're with me. Time to have a conversation with our friend at the shelter. The two Delta operators moved with the fluid efficiency of men who'd conducted hundreds of similar operations. They approached the shelter's entrance, their footsteps silent on the wet concrete. Williams tested the door, locked as expected. Shepard 4, a compact man with scarred hands, produced a small device from his jacket pocket. The lock clicked open in less than 10 seconds. Inside, the shelter was quiet except for the sounds of sleeping residents. Williams and his partner moved through the room like shadows, navigating between the beds without disturbing anyone. They found Dale Morrison's office at the back of the building, a cramped space with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a fold-out cot where the supervisor slept. Dale was snoring softly, his mouth open, his breath reeking of alcohol. Williams studied the man for a moment, noting the soft body, the weak chin, the complete absence of military bearing. This was the civilian who'd thrown a decorated war hero out into the cold. Williams reached out and gently shook Dale's shoulder. "Time to wake up, sir." Dale Morrison woke slowly, his mind foggy from sleep and cheap whiskey. At first, he thought he was dreaming. Two men in dark clothing stood beside his cot, their faces calm but somehow menacing. The taller one had eyes that seemed to see right through him. Who are you?" Dale stammered, struggling to sit up. "How did you get in here?" "We're here about Marcus Rodriguez," Williams said quietly. "The veteran you threw out into the storm 2 hours ago." Dale's confusion cleared, replaced by indignation. "That troublemaker? He was stealing food, causing problems. I had every right to—" "You had no right," Williams interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying a weight that made Dale's protests die in his throat. "You threw a decorated combat veteran out into freezing rain because you were having a bad day and needed someone to blame." "I don't know what you're talking about," Dale said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just break into my shelter and—" Williams pulled out his phone and showed Dale a photograph. It was Marcus in uniform, standing with his Delta Force unit in Afghanistan. He looked younger, stronger, more alive than the broken man who'd been ejected from the shelter. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez," Williams said. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, 47 classified missions. He's saved more American lives than you've probably met in your entire existence, and you threw him out like garbage because he looked at you wrong. Dale stared at the photo, his face paling. I didn't know. He never said anything about—" "He didn't say anything because he has more honor in his little finger than you have in your entire body," Williams continued. "He's been living on the streets for 8 months, dealing with PTSD and survivor's guilt, and instead of helping him, you decided to humiliate him in front of everyone." Williams's partner, Sergeant First Class Morrison, no relation to Dale, had been quietly going through the shelter's records on the desk computer. What he found made his jaw tighten with anger. "Williams," Morrison said softly, "you need to see this." The computer screen showed Dale's personnel file, including his military service record. Dale Morrison had enlisted in the Army in 1995, had made it through basic training, but had been discharged during his first deployment for failure to adapt to military environment. The discharge wasn't honorable. Well, Williams said, his voice dropping even lower. "Looks like we have a washout who's been taking his failures out on real soldiers." Dale's face went from pale to red. "That's not... I served my country too. I tried to..." "You tried and failed," Morrison interrupted. "And instead of dealing with that failure like a man, you've been bullying veterans who actually completed their service. How many others have you thrown out? How many real soldiers have you humiliated?" Dale didn't answer, but his eyes gave him away. This wasn't the first time he'd targeted a veteran, wasn't the first time he'd used his position to make someone else pay for his own inadequacies. Williams pulled out his phone and made a call. "Command, this is Shepard 1. Target is secured. Recommend immediate administrative action. Full package." Within minutes, Dale's phone began ringing. First, it was his supervisor from the city social services department. Then the shelter's board of directors. Then local news stations who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. Each call brought the same message. Dale Morrison was suspended pending investigation, and his actions were being reviewed by multiple agencies. How did you... "Who are you people?" Dale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're the people who don't forget," Williams replied. "We're the people who take care of our own. And we're the people who make sure that civilians like you understand there are consequences for disrespecting American heroes." While Williams and Morrison were having their conversation with Dale, the other two Delta operators had made their way to Marcus's location. They found him exactly where Tommy Chen had reported, still huddled in the doorway, now showing signs of mild hypothermia. "Ghost?" Sergeant First Class Peterson called softly. "Time to come home." Marcus looked up, his eyes taking a moment to focus. When he recognized Peterson, his expression shifted from confusion to something like shame. "What are you doing here?" "What we should have done months ago," Peterson replied, kneeling beside his former team leader. "We're bringing you home." "I don't need—" "Yes, you do," Sergeant First Class Davis interrupted, wrapping a thermal blanket around Marcus's shoulders. "And for once in your stubborn life, you're going to let us help you." Marcus started to protest, but the warmth of the blanket and the familiar faces of his brothers in arms broke through his defenses. For the first time in months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. They helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as circulation returned to his numb limbs. The black SUV pulled up to the curb, and Tommy Chen emerged from the shadows, his face breaking into a grin when he saw his former spotter walking under his own power. "Took you long enough to call for backup," Tommy said, falling into step beside Marcus. "I didn't call for backup," Marcus replied weakly. "You didn't have to," Peterson said. "That's what brothers are for." 6 months later, Marcus Rodriguez stood in the lobby of the newly renamed Rodriguez Veterans Center, watching as the last of the morning shift volunteers prepared breakfast for the residents. The facility had been Hope Haven Shelter, but new management and a complete overhaul had transformed it into something entirely different. Marcus wore a clean uniform now, not military dress, but the crisp polo and slacks of a facility director. His hair was cut, his face was clean-shaven, and his eyes had regained some of their old intensity. He'd been sober for 5 months, had been attending therapy sessions twice a week, and had slowly begun to rebuild his life. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first few weeks had been the hardest, as Marcus struggled with accepting help from his former unit. But gradually, he'd begun to understand that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was what soldiers did. They supported each other, covered each other's backs, and made sure no one was left behind. The Veterans Center now served 43 residents, all of them former military personnel who'd fallen on hard times. The facility had proper heating, decent food, and most importantly, staff who understood what these men and women had been through. Marcus had instituted a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect, and every staff member had been trained in trauma-informed care. Dale Morrison had been fired from his position and charged with several violations of city housing codes. The investigation had revealed a pattern of abuse and neglect that had been ignored by city officials for years. He'd been quietly blacklisted from working with any organization that served veterans. Colonel Mitchell visited regularly, as did the other members of Marcus's former unit. They'd established a support network that ensured no veteran in the city would ever face the streets alone. It was unofficial, unwritten, but absolutely effective. As Marcus watched the morning routine unfold, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Williams, now promoted to Sergeant Major, standing beside him with a cup of coffee. "How are you holding up, Ghost?" Williams asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Better. Not perfect, but better. Some days are harder than others." "That's all any of us can do," Williams replied. "Take it one day at a time." Through the window, Marcus could see the small memorial garden they'd installed in the courtyard. It contained a simple stone with an inscription, "No one fights alone." Below it, the names of unit members who hadn't made it home were etched in black granite. "You know what the best part is?" Marcus said, nodding toward the garden. "Every morning I wake up and I have a mission again. I have a purpose. I have brothers who won't let me fail." William smiled. "That's what we do, Ghost. We take care of our own." As the morning sun broke through the clouds, Casting warm light through the lobby windows, Marcus Rodriguez felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The homeless veteran who'd been thrown out into the storm was gone, replaced by a man who'd found his way home. And in a city where too many heroes had been forgotten, one facility now made sure that would never happen again. Outside, the American flag flew at full staff, snapping proudly in the morning breeze. Inside, 43 veterans began another day with dignity, respect, and the knowledge that they were finally truly home.